For the past 200 years, free market capitalism has been defined by a singular ethic: more, bigger, faster is better. That's fine in a world of infinite resources, but demand in our lives is increasingly outweighing our capacity, isn't it? Think about this. How many of you would say that as you look back over the last 3 years, the demand in your life has significantly increased? And how many of you would say, even though it's increased, and most of you agree it has, that over the next several years it will go still higher? And so that leads us to the $64,000 question, which is this. If demand is already increased dramatically, and if it's only going to get still higher, how many of you believe that your capacity to meet that demand will rise right along with the demand? That's the problem that we face. The problem is that more, bigger, faster generates value that is narrow, shallow, and short-term. We find ourselves today in an energy crisis. We know about the energy crisis that relates to the resources of the planet, but we ourselves have an energy crisis. This one is personal. We are at a moment, at an inflection point, where we know that the way we're working isn't working. We need a new way of working. We need a new paradigm for a new age. We need to learn to manage our energy rather than our time. You know, it used to be, until recently even, that if you needed to get more done, what did you do? You invested more hours. Well, that's fine, except time has a problem, doesn't it? It's finite. There are 24 hours in a day. There are 168 hours in a week. No congressional legislation is ever going to change that. Actually, no congressional legislation is ever going to change much of anything, it appears. So you're not going to change that, and yet you've still got to get things done. The good news is that energy, unlike time, is something that's inside you, and it has properties that make it a very powerful resource. It can be expanded, it can be renewed, and you can learn to use it more efficiently. We know that about objects in the universe. It is also true in terms of how we manage ourselves if we become more conscious and intentional about it. There are, it turns out, 4 kinds of energy in the human system. You can run a stove or a refrigerator on a single source of energy, but a human being needs 4 sources of energy. The first source of energy we need is physical. That's the quantity of your energy. It's the ground of all energy. It's what energy rests on. The second source of energy is emotional. That's the quality of your energy, because how you feel profoundly influences how you perform. The third source of energy is mental. Mental is the focus of your energy. Mental is the focus of your energy. So if you have an ability to do one thing at a time, that becomes a very powerful source of energy. And then the fourth source of energy is the energy of the human spirit. That's the energy derived from the experience that what you do really matters, from a deep sense of purpose. Because if something really matters to you, is there any question that we bring more energy to it? So in other words, it takes a village, an internal village, to run our lives. So how do we learn to manage our energy more skillfully? What's the answer here in a world of infinite demand? And interestingly, that's where paradox arises, because there isn't a simple answer. The answer lies in the ability, in the modern ability, to embrace our own opposites. This is an ancient concept. It comes from the Stoics, and it's called antikoleuthia. Antikoleuthia refers to the mutual entailment of the virtues. So by that understanding, no virtue is a virtue by itself. Honesty without compassion is cruelty. Tenacity without flexibility congeals into rigidity. Courage without prudence becomes recklessness. But the problem is that we choose up sides in our desperate hunger for answers, in our need for certainty in a dangerous world. We want to know one or the other, right or wrong. And it turns out that there isn't right or wrong. And so I want to look at how is it that we manage best across these four dimensions by learning to hold the opposites. So let's start at the physical level. Let's start at the level of the quantity of energy, the energy that sits at the foundation of all your sources of energy. So there we live, or most of us live, by a myth. And that myth is that we are meant to operate like computers at high speeds, continuously, for long periods of time, running multiple programs at the same time. But what ends up happening is that we end up, as my friend Linda Stone has said so brilliantly, we end up chasing our own technology. Instead of running it, it ends up running us, and we misunderstand the core of how a human being works, which is this. Human beings are designed to pulse between spending energy and renewing energy, aren't we? Just think of our heart rate. It's meant to rise and fall throughout the day, depending on demand. The same is true for our blood pressure. Our brain waves are meant to move between high-frequency electrical activity right now, as you're listening, and lower frequency at night, so you're capable of sleeping. Our muscles are meant to contract in the face of a demand and then relax when that demand eases. And when that does not happen, what you get is back pain and neck pain. We call that structural, but it's actually a failure of energy management. So what we need to do is we need to take a different view of renewal. Right now, what we value above all is the expenditure of energy, and we tend to undervalue, even to demonize and dismiss the renewal of energy. But in fact, the renewal of energy lies at the very heart of everything that matters. In the absence of renewal of energy, creativity and nuance and innovation and thoughtfulness and reflection and empathy are all compromised. Speed and continuous expenditure is the enemy of what is important. Athletes, it turns out, understand intuitively, instinctively, the power of renewal as it relates to enduring high performance, to sustainable high performance. So what an athlete understands is something called periodization, which is the managing of work-rest ratios. What does that mean? Well, what it means is that an athlete understands that renewing energy is as important as spending energy in the long-term prospect of being effective in whatever you do. We must learn to move freely between expending energy and renewing energy, and the bigger the amplitude of the wave you make in your life, the more you spend energy in a focused, intense way and then offset it with deep renewal, the healthier and the more powerful and the more effective you become. So now to the opposites that relate to the management of emotional energy. Here, the opposites we want to talk about are confidence and humility. But we don't value both of those equally, do we? We understand that confidence is where we should put our stock, and in fact, we misunderstand that. We believe that certainty is power and that vulnerability is weakness. Now, confidence is important. Confidence is a critical strength. But it is not sufficient, because often what we're doing is we're creating false confidence. We're putting on the appearance of confidence to cover our own insecurities. And when we do that, here's what happens. We get confidence untempered by humility that turns into arrogance and inflation and exaggerated self-regard. And that doesn't serve us well. To the contrary, the holding or the celebrating of these opposites leads to this reality, that a strength overused is in fact a weakness. And a weakness acknowledged is a strength. It's when we connect to others in part by our willingness to acknowledge our own shortcomings. Not only does it make it possible when we're willing to have the courage to acknowledge our own shortcomings, to open ourselves to more learning and more growth in a world of infinite new information, but it also allows us to reconnect to others. It's a portal to reconnection with others when those relationships have been ruptured, because vulnerability is such a way of creating connection. Humility is from the Greek word humilitas. It means grounded from the earth. Isn't that what we want for ourselves? Isn't that what we hope for from others? The third set of opposites is in the mental dimension. It's no surprise that in this dimension, we have once again chosen up sides. We've chosen up sides in the case of how we use our brains on the analytical, deductive, rational side, or the left hemisphere of the brain, and we've made a mythical assumption that creativity is genetic and somehow magical, and that it cannot be taught. There is nothing we need more than creativity in the world we live in right now. We need new answers to the problems we face. And the reality is that creativity emerges from whole brain thinking, and it can be taught systematically. So we grow up having learned to build our left hemisphere and make it the boss of who we are. That's the verbal part of our mind. It's analytic, it's deductive, it's rational, step by step. And we give that great credence. Ever since the Enlightenment, we have valued what we can observe and measure, and we have disdained what we cannot. We have undervalued the visual right hemisphere of the brain, which is intuitive and imaginative, and perhaps above all else, has the capacity to be integrative, which we so need in this oversimplified world. So we need to learn to stop operating half-brained. We need to learn to draw on the whole brain. And what scientists increasingly understand is that creativity emerges in predictable stages. And it's a movement over those stages from left hemisphere dominance to right hemisphere dominance. And we can indeed systematically build a process by which we can access the deepest and most imaginative sides of who we are if we respect both sides equally. And then finally, there's the set of opposites that relate to spiritual energy. Spiritual energy is the energy derived from the experience of a deep sense of purpose. And the reason it's a source of energy is because when something really matters to you, is there any question that you invest more energy in it, that you are more tenacious, that you persevere more in the face of setbacks, that you're more persuasive on behalf of your own mission? The problem is that once again, we've overvalued one virtue at the expense of another virtue and done ourselves a disservice in the process. We've adopted the myth that serving others is the greatest of goods and better, sometimes to the exclusion of taking care of ourselves. But the reality is that if you don't take care of yourself, you can not take care of others. It's just the obvious, the one that you hear every time you go up in a plane. When that mask drops, that oxygen mask drops in the course of a flight that's in trouble, and you're sitting by your child, your instinct, of course, is to take that oxygen mask and put it on your child. But the right move is to put that oxygen mask on yourself, because if you're not taking care of yourself, you are less capable of taking care of your child, and that applies to anybody that you are trying to act in service of. We need to find a way to balance taking care of others with taking care of ourselves. It's not about selfishness and selflessness. Those are extremes. It's about self-care and service and finding that middle ground. And often what we find is that the people who are most focused on taking care of others are worst about taking care of themselves. We see this in the work we do in the helping professions. We see it with nurses and doctors. We see it with teachers. We see it in nonprofit organizations. And what sets in is something that is a modern phenomenon, if I've ever heard of one: compassion fatigue. This comes from caring too much, from expending too much energy on behalf of others and too little energy on behalf of oneself, so that you end up getting burnout and breakdown and distraction and hopelessness. How ironic. You care too much. So where does this all lead us? Where does this all lead us? In the end, what do we need to do to manage ourselves more skillfully in a world of such extraordinary complexity and demand? To recognize that our inner lives are as important to understand as our outer lives have been up to now. And the answer, I believe, and I draw here on some of the thinking of James Hillman, the great psychologist, is to learn, above all, to love ourselves. To love ourselves means not just to love the best of ourselves, not just to love the best that we aspire to be, but to love the parts of ourselves that we despise, that we tend to deny in ourselves, that we find unacceptable and even humiliating. To love all of ourselves. It's a paradox we live in. We need to try hard, and we need to let go. And above all, we need, in a world of undue complacency and enormous problems, we need to learn to make waves so we can change lives, beginning with our own. Thank you very much.